Have you ever suffered with something you didn't know was a medical condition until a doctor told you? What happened? Welcome to the video. Make sure to subscribe and watch until the end. You won't want to miss this. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Story 1. Every time I eat, my body plays a real detective story for me. Flavors fade in and out as if someone is playing with the remote control of my receptors. Today, coffee tastes like cardboard, tomorrow, sweets seem bitter, and a week later, your favorite dish makes you nauseous just by smelling it. It's not a complete loss of taste, as with COVID, but a constant change in taste. Sugar can taste like metal, meat like fish, and water can taste like old iron. Restaurants have turned into battlefields where you never know if you will recognize your favorite dish. It's especially embarrassing when you're visiting, when you try to pretend to enjoy a meal prepared with love, but strange things happen in your mouth. My wife is used to my culinary whims, and my children laugh that their father has a broken tongue. ENT doctors check the receptors. Gastroenterologists looked for digestive problems. Neurologists did an MRI. Technically, everything was functioning. It turned out to be phantogeusia, a neurological disorder when the brain misinterprets taste signals or generates them without a real stimulus. The neurons of the taste zone work like a radio with poor reception. They pick up signals but distort them beyond recognition. Zinc supplements and B vitamins have somewhat stabilized the situation, but there is still no complete control over tastes. Every meal is a lottery where you can win pleasure or lose your appetite for the rest of the day. Story 2. When I laugh, bubbles come out of my nose as if I were a dolphin. At first, I was ashamed of this feature until the children in the yard declared me the coolest adult. The ENT explained that it was an excess of mucus fluid plus a specific anatomy. Now, at children's parties, I am a star with magic nose bubbles. Story 3. I was constantly tired, losing weight. I thought it was the stress of the session. It turned out to be thalassemia minor. I had always known about anemia, but it didn't bother me before, except that I always wanted to bite ice. Iron pills gave me back my energy, although my weight remained low. It's good that I found out that fainting 3 times a day is not very convenient. Story 4. My eyes have their own work schedule and periodically arrange technical breaks for me. In the middle of normal activities, everything around me suddenly becomes blurry, as if someone had smeared Vaseline on the camera lens. It's not a deterioration of vision with age, but episodic fog attacks that can last from minutes to hours. At first, I thought it was a problem with my glasses or computer fatigue, but the fog appeared even after rest and with new lenses. It's especially dangerous while driving. You can see the road normally, and a second later, everything becomes a milky spot. I had to give up driving during certain periods when I feel the fog approaching. The ophthalmologist checked the fundus, measured the pressure, did all possible examinations. Technically, my eyes are healthy. An ophthalmologist diagnosed an optical migraine without headache, vascular spasms in the visual cortex that cause temporary visual impairment. Blood vessels in the occipital part of the brain periodically constrict, disrupting the blood supply to the visual centers. Magnesia and vascular drugs have reduced the frequency of episodes, but it is impossible to completely get rid of foggy attacks. I have learned to recognize the first signs of approaching fog and always have a plan of action in case of sudden loss of vision. Story 5. Every day, thoughts of death seemed normal. Doesn't everyone live like that? When I told the doctors, they were horrified and assured me that it was not normal. The psychologist explained what depression is and why not all people constantly contemplate suicide. It turns out that most people do not wake up thinking about their own death. Story 6. For 30 years, I have been living with the feeling that the world is a bit unreal, as if I am looking at it through glass or in a fog. People, things, conversations seem distant, as if I were an observer in my own life. My friends talk about vivid emotions and hobbies, but I feel everything in a subdued way. I thought it was my character, my phlegmatic temperament. During the treatment of depression, a psychiatrist asked me about this feeling of detachment. It turned out to be depersonalization, a disorder of perception of reality. The brain protects itself from stress by turning off the emotional perception of the world. Everything becomes like a dream or a movie where you are not the main character but a spectator. Antidepressants partially help, but the feeling of full presence in life is still rare. It's surprising to learn that other people experience reality more vividly and lively. Story 7. For 21 years, I wrote 24/7. I wore diapers, then pads, and I didn't understand how other children could wear regular underwear and not feel uncomfortable. I thought it was normal. At my first gynecological examination at the age of 20, I warned the doctor about possible discharge. It turned out to be an ectopic third ureter, which was connected to the vaginal wall instead of the bladder. The surgery fixed everything. Now I have hundreds of pairs of beautiful underwear. I compensate for my childhood. Story 8. For 30 years, every morning I woke up feeling as if I had been unloading railroad cars all night. My back, neck, jaws, everything was painful and tense. My wife complained that I grind my teeth in my sleep, and in the morning my pillow was covered in sweat. I thought it was my job stress and I needed to rest more. My friends advised me to change the mattress, go in for sports, drink soothing teas. Nothing helped. During a regular checkup, the dentist noticed the worn teeth and asked about the headaches. It turned out to be bruxism and sleep apnea. In my sleep, I would stop breathing for minutes, my brain would wake up in a panic, and my jaws would clench in a dead grip. Now I sleep with a mouth guard and a CPAP machine. For the first time in 30 years, I woke up rested. It turns out that sleep can be not torture, but recovery. Story 9. Throughout my student years, I suffered from a strange concentration disorder. I could read a page of text and not remember a single word. My eyes would glide over the lines, but my thoughts would wander somewhere far away. My teachers scolded me for inattention, and I blamed myself for being lazy. I increased my study hours, but the result was getting worse. My friends could easily learn the material, but I had to reread a paragraph 10 times. A neuropsychologist diagnosed a deficit in working memory. The brain cannot retain information for processing. Like a computer with too little RAM, everything runs out faster than it can be processed. Special exercises and training techniques help, but you have to work 3 times as hard as others. At least now I know that the problem is not laziness, but the peculiarities of the brain. Story 10. For 15 years, I suffered from cramps and missed school for weeks. My mom told me to be patient and go to school. The doctor diagnosed teenage problems and advised ibuprofen. At 13, she was ashamed to buy hormonal contraceptives to relieve the pain. Only a gynecologist recognized endometriosis. It's a good thing I don't live in a religious place. I would have suffered even longer with these women's whims there. Story 11. The first time it happened was in a supermarket at the checkout. Suddenly the world began to revolve around me, as if I were on a carousel that someone had spun at full speed. My legs broke and I had to grab the trolley to keep from falling right between the customers. The cashier asked me if I was okay, and I couldn't explain that I felt like I was in the center of a tornado, even though everything was calm around me. Such attacks of dizziness began to recur more often, in transportation, at work, at home during ordinary activities. Sometimes it seemed that the floor under my feet was swaying like the deck of a ship in a storm. Sometimes I felt like I was spinning in space. The ENT doctor checked my ears, the cardiologist checked my heart, the neurologist did an MRI of my brain. Everything was normal. I began to avoid public places, afraid of falling and making myself look ridiculous. The otoneurologist finally diagnosed benign paroxysmal positional vertigo. The crystals in the inner ear shift and deceive the brain about the position of the body in space. Special exercises help to put these crystals back in place, but the attacks can recur without warning. Now I always stay close to a wall or furniture. You never know when the internal compass will go crazy again. Story 12. My body has decided to arrange daily sessions of Russian roulette with my temperature. Without any warning, an internal fire or ice storm starts. Not the flu, not the common cold, but the body's thermostat, which works like a broken air conditioner. I can be sitting in a warm room and suddenly start shivering as if I were at the North Pole or vice versa, throw away all the blankets and open the windows wide in the middle of winter. My colleagues at work are used to my metamorphoses, sometimes in a sweater in the summer, sometimes in a t-shirt in the winter. It looks especially interesting when I change from warm clothes to summer clothes and back in 5 minutes. An endocrinologist checked my thyroid, a gynecologist ruled out menopause, although I am a man. An infectious disease specialist looked for hidden pathogens. Everything was normal. It turned out to be dysregulation of the hypothalamus, the part of the brain that controls body temperature. After a stressful period of life, the thermostat broke down and now works chaotically. Every day is a lottery. Am I an Eskimo or a desert dweller today? Hormone replacement therapy has partially stabilized the situation, but it has not yet been possible to fully adjust the internal thermostat. I learned to wear multi-layered clothes and always have a backpack with spare items. You never know what season your body will be in the next hour. Story 13. For 3 years, I limped with pain in my heel, and the first doctor said it was a sprain. The kids called it Achilles fake. At the new school, the physical education teacher recognized the symptoms, ankylotendinitis. The bones were growing faster than the tendons, the tissue was torn. 2 years of physiotherapy returned the ability to run without pain. It turns out that there are no muscles where the Achilles tendon hurts, so sprained a muscle sounded absurd. Story 14. Since my teenage years, I have had a strange habit of getting hung up in the middle of a sentence. I start telling a story, reach the climax, and forget what I wanted to say. I don't just forget a word, I completely lose the thread of the story. I stand there with my mouth open like a broken robot until the person I'm talking to helps me remember. My friends got used to my hang-ups. My family joked about the blonde in the brain. I thought it was absent-mindedness, too many things in my head. I needed to concentrate better. During the memory test, the neurologist found minor disorders in the frontal lobes of the brain, the consequences of childhood head injuries. The neurons in the area responsible for the sequence of thoughts work intermittently like a badly tuned radio station. Nootropic drugs partially help, but the main thing is that I have learned to warn people about my technical breaks in speech. Story 15. My memory works like a leaky colander. Important things fall out forever, and the little things are stored in details. I can forget my wife's birthday, but I remember the color of a stranger's sweater on the bus 3 years ago. The phone number disappears from my head in seconds, but the melody from the commercial plays for months. Colleagues are surprised that I remember all the details of a work project from 5 years ago, but forget about a meeting scheduled yesterday. A neuropsychologist diagnosed selective memory with impaired information filtering. The brain doesn't distinguish between important and unimportant information, keeping everything or throwing it away at random, like a computer with a broken file sorting algorithm. Diaries and reminders in my phone have become my memory prostheses, and without them, life turns into a chaos of forgotten promises and missed appointments. Story 16. For 30 years, I thought that everyone sometimes loses words in the middle of a sentence, as if my tongue were stuck and my thoughts were scattered. At work, he was ashamed of these pauses and made excuses. A neurologist diagnosed a mild form of aphasia after microstrokes. It turned out that minor vascular disorders had been damaging my speech centers for years. Now I do exercises with a speech therapist and take nootropics. Story 17. Math was difficult, but teachers said try harder. The numbers danced on the paper and I spent hours solving examples. My parents hired tutors and I blame myself for my stupidity. When I was 25, a psychologist conducted tests, dyscalculia. It turns out that the brain simply processes numbers differently, and it's not laziness or stupidity. It's a pity I found out after university. Story 18. That futility saved my life. I decided to shave my head in the summer, but first I felt my skull to see if it was crooked. I found a wide, soft bump under the skin. The surgeon thought it was a cyst, treated it with antibiotics, then cut it open. I waited for 3 weeks for the results of the biopsy, working as usual. The nurse on the phone said, "Come immediately, it's lymphoma." That day I went to bed and did not get up. My grandmother died of the same thing 2 months ago. After treatment, night sweats and joint pain disappeared. The cancer was detected twice in vain. Story 19. Sometime before the second grade, I was constantly vomiting after eating. Doctors did not attach any importance to this. Once it got so bad that my mom took me to the emergency room. After examinations, they found a Meckel's diverticulum in my small intestine, a remnant of the embryonic tube that nourished me in the womb. It released acid when eating, and the small intestine, unlike the stomach, has no protection against it. One surgery, and I could finally eat without vomiting. Now I'm happily getting fat instead of being permanently thin. Story 20. For 12 years, every morning I wake up with the impression that I've been practicing karate with an invisible opponent all night. My muscles are tense, my joints ache, and the sheets are twisted into knots. My wife complains that I kick her in my sleep, and the kids have moved to another room because of my nightly dancing. I thought it was a restless sleep due to stress at work. I needed to relax more before going to bed. I tried meditation, warm baths, aromatherapy. Nothing helped. The somnologist connected special sensors at night and found a strange picture. My muscles do not turn off during the REM phase of sleep, when the brain should paralyze the body. Instead of calm dreams, I physically recreate all the actions from my dreams, running, fighting, running away from monsters. REM behavioral disorder has turned sleep into an extreme sport. Clonazepam helped me to tame the night fighter, and now I sleep more peacefully, although sometimes I still play football with a pillow. Story 21. For the past 5 years, my sleep has turned into a Russian roulette with awakenings. I fall asleep normally, but wake up in a variety of positions and places in the apartment. It's not sleepwalking in the classical sense, but rather sleep parkour. I can fall asleep in bed and wake up in the kitchen by the fridge with a sandwich in my hand or in the bathroom with a toothbrush. The worst thing is that I don't remember these trips. There is a gap in my memory between falling asleep and waking up. My wife says that she saw me at night methodically moving books from one shelf to another or trying to wash a pillow in the sink. I had to put locks on all the dangerous rooms, hide the car keys, and install an alarm on the door. It's especially frightening that during these episodes I can look awake and even answer questions, but I'm actually asleep. The somnologist diagnosed complex sleepwalking with somatic automatisms. The brain turns off consciousness but leaves motor functions and some cognitive processes active. It turns out that you can sleep and at the same time perform complex actions without being aware of them. Medication therapy has reduced the frequency of episodes, but it is not yet possible to completely control nighttime adventures. Every morning begins with a detective investigation. What did my sleeping brain do last night? Story 22. My skin reacts to touch as if I were electrically charged. The lightest contact with a cloth, a handshake, or even a breeze causes painful sensations similar to an electric shock. Not allergies or hypersensitivity, but real pain signals from seemingly innocent touches. Synthetic clothing turns a day into torture. Hugs from loved ones become a test of endurance, and even hot water from the shower seems like boiling water with needles. Dermatologists were looking for skin diseases. Allergists tested for all possible irritants. Psychologists suggested psychosomatics. All the tests were clean, but the pain was real. I had to switch to wearing only natural cotton clothes, avoid shaking hands, and warn people about my electricity. It's especially difficult with children. They don't understand why they can't hug their dad as they used to. After a lengthy examination, a neurologist diagnosed allodynia, a pain sensitivity disorder where neurons misinterpret tactile signals as pain. My brain turned touch into agony due to peripheral nerve damage. Gabapentin partially dulls the wrong pain signals, but it is still unusual to live in a world where every touch is a potential threat. I have learned to appreciate the moments when I can touch something without pain. This is a real luxury for a person with electrical skin. Story 23. For 12 years, I was unloading pumpkins for a church in the rain. The wheelbarrow overturned, I fell, and my back hurt. I thought it was just a bruise, it would go away. Months passed. The pain spread to my leg, and I started limping. My family said, "Pull yourself together, it's all in your head." It turned out to be sciatica, a damaged nerve that goes down the spine. There is no medicine, only pills with side effects. I have been living with pain for years, and my relatives still consider it a simulation. Story 24. For 5 years, I climbed the Yosemite waterfalls, but gradually the activity became more difficult. Cycling was painful, I had zero endurance, and my mother scolded me for my strange gait. My ankle almost touched the ground. It turned out that the bones of the feet were fused incorrectly. He used the wrong muscles to walk. Rigid insoles and surgery on one leg helped, but the other remained flat. Now, after a shower, I see two different footprints. Story 25. When I fall asleep, sometimes I hear the loudest sound in the world, like a cannon shot that slowly fades away. It's strange that it doesn't hurt, even though it seems deafening. A month ago, I learned the name exploding head syndrome on Reddit. It turns out that my brain sometimes has sound hallucinations before going to bed. At least now I know I'm not going crazy. Story 26. For 9 years in a row, my tongue has been periodically forgetting Ukrainian and starting to speak a mixture of words from different languages that I have never learned. It's not aphasia after a stroke, but strange episodes when I try to say an ordinary word and something similar to French, Italian, or even incomprehensible comes out of my mouth. It's especially noticeable when I'm excited or tired. My brain seems to switch to an unknown language mode. At first, my family thought I was joking, imitating foreign accents, until they realized that I really had no control over this process. The strangest thing is that sometimes I speak in languages I don't know at all. I can talk for a whole minute about something similar to Japanese without understanding a word. Speech therapists checked my speech functions. Neurologists did an MRI of my brain. Linguists tried to identify languages. Some of them look like real languages, some like fictional constructions. It turned out to be xenoglossia combined with speech dysarthria, a rare neurological disorder when damaged speech centers begin to generate pseudo-language constructions, imitating the intonation and structure of real languages. The brain remembers the sound patterns that it once heard and randomly combines them. Speech therapy helps me return to my native language faster, but the episodes of multilingualism recur. Now I warn my interlocutors that sometimes I can speak Martian. This is not a joke, but a medical condition. Story 27. For 35 years, my nose has lived a life of its own. It's constantly stuffy, but not from colds. I breathe through my mouth, snore at night, and my sense of smell works from time to time. ENT doctors prescribed drops, rinses, and physiotherapy, but the relief lasted a week at most. Allergists were looking for reactions to dust, flowers, cats. Everything was clear. I thought it was a chronic allergy to something unknown. I would have to live like this. The family got used to my mouth breathing, and nighttime tractor, a computed tomography scan, showed an anatomical feature, a curved nasal septum and polyps that have been blocking the airways since birth. The surgery corrected the situation in 2 hours. For the first time in my life, I can breathe through my nose with a full chest. It turns out that air can come in not only through the mouth. It is amazing to discover the sense of smell as a full-fledged sense. Story 28. For 40 years, I thought that all children had joint pain, got tired from the sun, and were constantly sick. It turned out that I had lupus. Yeah, sometimes it really is lupus, despite all the jokes about Dr. House. It's amazing how long you can live thinking your symptoms are normal until a doctor says otherwise. Now I understand why as a child I always hid in the shade, while other children could play in the sun for hours without any problems. Story 29. My father washed my breast milk all my childhood. He pulled the skin every time I urinated. Gradually, it went away on its own, stayed pulled back longer. By the time I was a teenager, it had completely opened. Now I look circumcised without a painful operation. My brother did not do this and had to be circumcised at 30. It is strange that this method is rarely mentioned as an alternative to surgery. Story 30. For 20 years, my brain has been organizing a horror movie festival every night. When I try to fall asleep, real blockbusters with monsters, disasters, and chases start playing before my eyes. Not the usual dreams that come after falling asleep, but vivid, detailed visual hallucinations on the verge of consciousness and sleep. I can lie with my eyes closed and see huge spiders crawling on the ceiling, or the room slowly filling with water, or some horrible face peering through the window. The worst thing is that you realize that this is not reality, but it is impossible to stop the movie theater. At first, I was so scared that I couldn't sleep for hours, but then I learned to take these visions as a free movie before bed. My wife did not understand why I tossed and turned in bed with a tense face for so long, and my children complained that I scared them with my screams in my sleep. After a polysomnography, a neurologist diagnosed hypnagogic hallucinations, a disorder of the transition between wakefulness and sleep when the REM phase begins prematurely. The brain starts dreaming while the consciousness is still active, creating the effect of an open-eyed movie. It turns out that this is not a mental illness, but a feature of neurophysiology. Some people dream half awake. Melatonin and relaxation techniques partially help, but it's impossible to completely turn off the evening horror movie. I've learned to take it as free entertainment before bed, although sometimes I'd like to watch comedies instead of thrillers. Story 31. For 25 years, I have been suffering from a constant feeling that I have forgotten something important. I can't concentrate on a conversation because the thought of an unfinished task is always in my head. I make endless to-do lists, but this makes me even more nervous. My family got used to my notebooks and reminders on my phone. They thought I was just diligent and responsible. I considered myself a perfectionist, but the constant anxiety was exhausting. I couldn't enjoy my vacation, parties, movies. There was always something hanging in my mind. During anxiety therapy, a psychologist diagnosed generalized anxiety disorder. The brain is constantly looking for threats and problems, even when there are none. What if became my life motto? Meditation and medication help, but the process is long. I am learning to live in the moment, not in future disasters. Story 32. My hands have turned into hypersensitive lie detectors. When people tell lies, my palms start to burn as if I have touched hot metal. It's not intuition or psychological insight, but the physical pain that occurs during false conversations. At first, it seemed like a coincidence that my hands burned during arguments with unscrupulous sellers or political debates on TV. Then I noticed a pattern. The bigger the lie, the more painful it was. Even an innocent courtesy like "how beautiful you look" from someone who doesn't sincerely think so causes a slight tingle. I had to avoid business negotiations, political programs, even everyday conversations with people who often embellish reality. It's especially difficult with children. Their childish inventions also activate my detector. At first, the neurologist did not believe in such a specific symptom, but after a detailed examination, he found hyperactivity of mirror neurons combined with somatization of stress. My brain reacts so subtly to micro-expressions and tone of voice that a lie causes a stress response that manifests itself in pain in the palms of my hands. It's not a superpower, but a neurological anomaly that makes living in society extremely painful in the truest sense of the word. Story 33. For 40 years, my stomach has been putting on concerts at the most inopportune moments. Important meetings, romantic dinners, silence in the theater, and suddenly rumbling as if a hungry bear lives there. I eat regularly, but my stomach still sings an hour after eating. My colleagues got used to my stomach arias, and my friends joked about my talking stomach. I thought it was a feature of my digestion, a fast metabolism, and I needed to eat more often. During the examination, the gastroenterologist noticed the specific nature of the sounds and ordered additional tests. It turned out to be a syndrome of excessive bacterial growth in the small intestine. Microbes were having a real party there, fermenting food with noise effects. Antibiotics and probiotics helped, but they didn't achieve complete silence. At least now I know that my stomach is not just hungry, but medically sound. Story 34. During labor, they put the baby on my chest and I felt nothing. I thought it was fatigue after childbirth. My wife cried with happiness, my relatives rejoiced, and I smiled automatically. Weeks passed. I played the role of a caring father, but I felt empty inside. The pediatrician asked me how I was feeling, and I confessed. It turned out to be postpartum depression in men. Who knew that fathers could also not feel connected after the birth of a child? Story 35. My sister was worried about blisters on her tongue, so she went to the doctor. He spent a long time examining her mouth, and she was worried. The diagnosis stunned her. You have taste buds. It turned out that hers were just more prominent than the others, and the tongue stuck out further. Now we laugh, but back then she was really afraid of cancer because of a common anatomical feature. Story 36. Throughout my teenage years, I suffered from strange bouts of anger out of nowhere. I could be doing my homework calmly and suddenly start screaming, throwing things, hitting the walls. An hour later, he would become normal again, not realizing what had happened. His parents took him to psychologists, talking about the teenage crisis and hormones. Teachers complained about his aggressiveness, classmates avoided him. He began to consider himself an uncontrollable psychopath. At the age of 18, a neurologist noticed minor abnormalities in the electroencephalogram during the examination. It turned out to be high-grade epilepsy with aggressive seizures. The brain was organizing electrical storms in the area responsible for emotions. Anticonvulsant drugs changed his life. Now his anger has reasons and limits and does not explode like a volcano without warning. Story 37. He always ate quickly, as if someone would take his plate away. His family used to laugh at his vacuum cleaner. At meetings with friends, he would finish first and wait for the others. The gastroenterologist asked about the speed of eating, and it turned out that it was a symptom of anxiety. My childhood experience of fighting for food with my brothers turned into a neurotic habit. Now I consciously count my chewing movements. Story 38. Doctors are always surprised when they measure my blood pressure. Are you sure you feel well? For me, 180/100 has been the usual norm for 20 years with no discomfort. I run marathons, do sports, and have enough energy for everything. Cardiologists prescribe drugs that turn me into a vegetable. My blood pressure dropped to normal, but I could barely walk. It turned out that I have a rare form of essential hypertension. My blood vessels have adapted to high pressure since childhood, and normal pressure is like hunger for my body. Now I don't monitor the numbers on the blood pressure monitor, but my own well-being. It turns out that medical norms don't always suit everyone. Sometimes your disease is actually your individual norm. Story 39. My stomach plays Szczedrik every time I eat. Not an ordinary grumble, but a real melody in the key of G major. At first, my wife thought I was joking until the gastroenterologist recorded the concert on a dictaphone. It turned out to be musical intestinal contractions. Now at parties, I show the singing belly act, always a success. Story 40. My muscles have a will of their own, and from time to time they give me unexpected performances. In the middle of a calm conversation, my leg can jerk sharply, my arm can wave uncontrollably, or my whole body can shudder as if from an electric shock. These are not cramps or seizures, but short muscle spasms that occur without warning at the most inopportune moments. I am especially embarrassed at important meetings when I try to look serious and respectable, and my hand suddenly blows in the air or my foot taps under the table. My colleagues are used to my dance moves, and my friends joke about my internal music, but for me it's a real torment. The worst thing about public transportation is that you can accidentally hit a neighbor or attract attention with incomprehensible movements. The neurologist diagnosed myoclonus, involuntary short-term muscle contractions due to increased excitability of motor neurons. Electrical impulses in the spinal cord are sometimes shortened, sending chaotic signals to the muscles. This can be the result of stress, lack of sleep, or simply an individual feature of the nervous system. Magnesia and relaxants reduce the frequency of spasms, but it is impossible to completely control unruly muscles. I had to learn to warn people about my dancing and always keep my hands away from fragile objects. You never know when my muscles will decide to do an amateur act. Story 41. The first panic attack seemed like a heart attack. My mom thought I was faking it again to avoid going to school. The psychologist explained the next day. I also learned that it is not normal to think about suicide every day. I honestly thought that everyone lived like this, but the doctors were horrified when I told them about it. It turns out that not everyone has such thoughts all the time. Story 42. When someone starts talking about their problems, I automatically feel their pain in my own body. Not metaphorically, it really hurts where they are. A friend complains of a headache, and I immediately get a migraine. My son cuts his finger, and I feel a burning pain in the same place. My family got used to the fact that I was sensitive, but it was physically exhausting. I avoided hospitals, funerals, even movies about illnesses. All this turned into personal torture. The psychiatrist explained that it was hyperempathy with somatic manifestations. My brain is so active in imitating someone else's pain that it creates real painful sensations. This is not a spiritual kindness, but a neurological feature. Meditation and emotional boundary techniques help me to turn off other people's pain, but I am not yet able to fully control this process. Story 43. For 15 years, every morning I wake up with the feeling that I have fallen into a deep hole. Not physical fatigue, but some kind of heavy veil on my soul, as if the world had lost all its colors overnight. My parents said, "Don't sour, you have to move." My friends advised me to go in for sports and think positive. I forced myself to smile and go to parties, but there was a dead emptiness inside. I thought it was my nature, my pessimistic mindset, and I needed to work on myself more. For years, I tried different ways to cheer up, traveling, hobbies, new acquaintances, but the morning darkness returned every day. During the thyroid examination, the endocrinologist asked about his mood and energy. It turned out to be seasonal depression, which turned into chronic depression due to vitamin D deficiency and circadian rhythm disorders. The brain did not produce enough serotonin, especially in winter. Now I use a light therapy lamp, take vitamins and antidepressants. For the first time in years, mornings can be not a torture, but the beginning of the day with opportunities. Story 44. For 20 years, my eyebrows have lived a life of their own. They rise and fall without my knowledge, creating strange emotions. My colleagues thought I was always skeptical of their ideas until a neurologist diagnosed me with hyperkinesis of the facial muscles. Now I warn people that my eyebrows are separate personalities with their own opinions. Story 45. For the past 10 years, my nasal sense of smell has been working like a misconfigured smoke detector. I constantly smell burning, even when the air around me smells like flowers or fresh bread. It's not a loss of smell, like a cold, but a constant feeling that something is smoldering or burning somewhere nearby. Sometimes it's light smoke. Sometimes it's an intense smell of burnt rubber or wiring. It is especially intense during times of stress or fatigue. Then it seems that the whole apartment is on fire. I had to check all the electrical appliances, stove, heaters 10 times a day, and even called the fire department when the smell became unbearable. They found nothing, and I was left with the feeling of a constant fire threat. ENT doctors rinsed my sinuses, neurologists did an MRI of my brain, psychiatrists suggested hallucinations. Technically, everything was fine. It turned out to be phantasmia, a neurological disorder when olfactory receptors or corresponding areas of the brain generate odors without a real source. The neurons in the olfactory zone send false signals, creating the illusion of a burning smell. This can be the result of viral infections, head injuries, or simply age-related changes in the nervous system. Nasal corticosteroids partially reduce the intensity of phantom odors, but it has not yet been possible to completely get rid of the constant smoke in the nose. I have learned to live with an internal smoke detector that is always on the alert, even when the air smells like roses. Story 46, a coffee shop morning shift. I'm making the 100th cappuccino of the day when suddenly my hands start shaking so badly that the milk scatters all over the table. It's not nervousness in front of an important client or an excess of caffeine. It's a real earthquake in my own limbs. At first, I blamed it on fatigue, then on the stress of working with people, but the tremors became more frequent and stronger. His hands shook while eating, writing, and even during sleep, he sometimes woke up from his own convulsions. My colleagues noticed, my clients looked at me with pity, and I tried to hide my hands in my pockets or sit down so that I could rest them on something. My family said, drink less coffee or get some rest, but I realized it was something more serious. After a long examination, the neurologist diagnosed essential tremor, a genetic disease when the nervous system sends excessive signals to the muscles. It turned out that my grandfather also trembled, but in his time it was called old age. Propranolol partially helped to curb the internal earthquake, but it was impossible to completely get rid of the tremors. I had to change my profession. Now I work with computers, where hand tremors are less noticeable. It is strange to realize that your nervousness is actually a hereditary neurological disease with a medical name. Story 47. Since childhood, I have had a strange feature. I cannot distinguish people's faces. I recognize my acquaintances by their voice, gait, hairstyle, but if they change their style, I'll pass my own uncle. At school, I was constantly confusing my classmates, and teachers thought I was inattentive. My colleagues at work were offended that I didn't greet them, but I simply didn't recognize them without my work clothes. My wife laughed that I could get lost in a crowd and not find her. I thought it was a bad memory for faces. It happens. During the examination of cognitive functions, a neurologist diagnosed prosopagnosia, face blindness. The part of the brain responsible for recognizing features is not working properly. I can describe a face in detail, but I can't remember it as a complete image. Now I warn people about my peculiarity and remember them by special signs, glasses, smile, moles. Story 48. For 15 years, doctors told me that irregular periods were normal for teenagers. One year I had only 3 cycles. When I tried to get pregnant at 27 and went off contraceptives, my periods disappeared completely. I started having panic attacks, depression, and headaches. A blood test showed a pituitary tumor. It turned out that it had been growing since puberty and caused infertility. I came to treat my menstrual problems and found out that I had a tumor in my brain. Story 49. All the time I heard ringing in my ears, and I thought everyone had it. At school, after the concert, my friends complained that their ears were still ringing from the loud music. I was surprised. Is it strange? They thought I was high. It turned out to be tinnitus, a constant ringing that I was born with. The doctor said, "Nothing can be done. Get used to it." Now I sleep to the white noise of a computer cooler. Story 50. For 40 years, I have been living with a strange ritual. Before going to bed, I have to check that all the doors are closed, that the stove is off, and that the alarm clock is set. Not just once, but at least 7 times. I'll get out of bed at 2 in the morning because I think I forgot to check something. At first, my wife thought it was my responsibility, but then she got annoyed. I scolded myself for being paranoid, but I couldn't sleep without these checks. My colleagues joked that I was a pedant, but in fact I was making myself hell every night. During a conversation about insomnia, a psychiatrist asked me about these rituals. It turned out to be an obsessive-compulsive disorder. The brain gets fixated on thoughts of danger and forces you to repeat actions for safety. Obsessive thoughts of fire, robbery, and disaster were a constant. Now I take medication and do cognitive exercises. For the first time in a decade, I can go to bed without checking the stove for the 10th time. Story 51. Every step I take sounds like I'm marching in a parade to the drums in my head. Not an ordinary heartbeat, but a real orchestra in my temporal arteries. a pulsating rhythm that synchronizes with the slightest movement of blood. I climb the stairs, the drumbeat intensifies, I bend down to tie my shoes. The timpani in my ears make a solo. At first I thought it was high blood pressure or the effects of too much training, but the sound did not disappear even at rest. At night it's especially terrible. You lie in silence, and the endless composition of your own blood circulation plays in your head. You can fall asleep only with loud music or earplugs, but even they do not completely muffle the internal drumming. ENT doctors checked his hearing, cardiologists did an ECG and ultrasound of the heart, but technically everything was normal. My friends didn't understand what I was talking about. How can you hear your own heartbeat? It turned out that you can, and it is called pulsatile tinnitus. The blood vessels near the inner ear have dilated or changed shape, creating blood turbulence that resonates in the ear canal. Each heartbeat is converted into an acoustic signal. Beta blockers somewhat reduce the intensity of the concert, but it is impossible to completely remove the sound. Now I always wear headphones, the only way to drown out my own internal orchestra. Story 52. For 7 months, my testicles were so painful that I begged doctors to remove them. 4 visits to the emergency room, mountains of painkillers, nothing helped. Not a single urologist had heard of my problem. Finally, a specialist from Rush University diagnosed pudendal neuropathy. The nerve was stuck in the on state and caused constant pain. The operation burned the nerves forever. Now the left side of the armpit is completely anesthetized, but at least it does not hurt. Story 53. I used to lie on the floor, screaming in pain every month. My parents scolded me for being irresponsible and missing school. I would lose consciousness from spasms, and only in my sleep would I find peace. After puberty, life turned into hell once a month. It turns out that endometriosis doesn't have to make you faint, and it's not a woman's whim or a simulation of the disease. Story 54. My hair changes color depending on my mood. It gets darker when I'm upset, lighter when I'm happy. Hairdressers are shocked, scientists are interested, and I save money on dye. The trichologist confirmed that stress affects melanin in the follicles. Now my friends can tell my mood without words. Story 55. Morning, the mirror, the usual toothbrushing routine, and suddenly a real bloodbath begins in my mouth. The gums bleed so much that it feels like a surgery is taking place without anesthesia. At first I thought it was a too hard toothbrush or I had injured my gums with hard food. I changed brushes to softer ones, rinsed with chamomile, used special pastes for sensitive gums. Nothing helped. The bleeding became more intense. Sometimes I woke up in the morning with a pillow stained with blood. The dentist examined his mouth for a long time, asked about hygiene, prescribed professional cleaning, but the bleeding did not stop. He began to be ashamed of smiling, avoided kissing his wife, and constantly rinsed his mouth at work to avoid the smell of blood. After a detailed examination, the periodontist diagnosed aggressive periodontitis, an autoimmune disease when the body's own immune system attacks the gum tissue. It turned out that my body perceived my own gums as enemy defenders and waged a real war against them. Special therapy with antibiotics and immunosuppressants helped to stop the internal civil war in my mouth. Now every morning begins not with blood, but with normal brushing of teeth. It is strange to appreciate such an ordinary thing. Story 56. For years, I suffered from burning pain in my stomach, lived on soda and Tumsy. Then I developed chest pains after eating, constant bloating, and lost my appetite. He was admitted to the hospital before Christmas because he hadn't eaten anything for 3 days and threw up 3 days old food. The nurses laughed and diagnosed him with gastroparesis and acid reflux. Lose weight was the only advice. 4 months later, my sister decided not to eat gluten and dairy for a week. I supported her. In a week, all the problems disappeared. She was found to be intolerant to lactose and wheat. Story 57. Doctors diagnosed fibromyalgia, pain everywhere. I thought I was going to die of cancer. I was relieved that it was not fatal, but disappointed that I would have to live without medication for life. They prescribed Cymbalta, said see you in a month, without explanation. At home, I Googled it. It turned out to be much worse than it seemed in the office. The medications are terrible, the condition is chronic, but at least I have a life. Story 58. For 12 years, every summer I was covered with red spots. My skin itched unbearably. My parents smeared it with brilliant green, thinking it was mosquitoes or an allergy to the sun. Camps, the sea, the dacha turned into a hell of itching and shame for my appearance. My friends got used to me always wearing long sleeves even in the heat. The dermatologist looked at the location of the rashes for a long time and asked about the reaction to metal jewelry. It turned out to be psoriasis arctica, which is exacerbated by ultraviolet radiation and sweat. Genetic predisposition plus sunlight created this beauty every summer. Now I use special creams and avoid the peak hours of the sun. It's strange to realize that you can enjoy summer without the constant urge to rip off your skin. Story 59. I've always felt weird among normal people. A colleague at work was happy that her multiple sclerosis had finally been officially diagnosed. She was denied disability because she didn't want to take antidepressants. The doctor insisted that the problem was depression due to the children's growing up. Sometimes it's better to have a serious illness with a name than to simulate something uncertain. Story 60. Every time I get excited, my ears turn red so brightly that you can light up the room. I thought it was just a normal blush, until my colleagues started using me as a stress detector at meetings. The cardiologist explained that the dilated vessels in my ears react to adrenaline. Now I wear a hat at interviews, otherwise everyone can see my red alert. Story 61. My wife always complained that I snore melodiously. I thought it was a compliment until the neighbors started recording my nightly concerts. It turned out that I sing in my sleep, not just snoring, but singing whole arias. A somnologist confirmed that it was nocturnal vocalization. Now I put a microphone by my bed. Maybe I'll become a YouTube star with nightly hits. Story 62. At the age of 17, my mother noticed that I was sleeping too much and was always tired. The tests were shocking. Intolerance to gluten, milk, eggs, coffee, garlic, and some fish. The doctor said, "You have the blood and organs of a 70-year-old. My joints hurt. I was constantly tired. I had an intestinal disorder. It turned out to be a severe exhaustion of the body. For years, I thought that everyone felt lousy after eating. Story 63. For 15 years, I thought my memory was just very good. I remember what I ate for breakfast 1347 days ago and what sweater the cashier was wearing in the store 3 years ago. My colleagues were surprised at my superpowers, but I thought it was normal. A psychologist diagnosed me with hypermnesia. I can't forget details. Now I know that my head is a hard disk with no delete function. Story 64. My voice lives its own independent life. In the middle of a sentence, it can break into a falsetto like a teenager or vice versa, sink to the bass depths of an opera singer. Not an emotional reaction to stress, but a real vocal roller coaster without warning. I can start a phone conversation in a normal tone and end it with a squeak or hoarseness, forcing the other person to ask if it's really me. It's especially awkward at work meetings when I try to express a serious thought and my voice decides to switch to cartoon character mode. At first, my colleagues thought I was joking, but then they got used to my vocal metamorphoses. ENT doctors examined the vocal cords, neurologists checked the nerve connections, psychologists suggested psychosomatics. Anatomically, everything was normal. I had to give up public speaking, avoid telephone conversations, and record important messages in advance. After a long analysis, the phoniatrician diagnosed spastic dysphonia, a neurological disease when the laryngeal muscles receive incorrect signals from the brain. The vocal cords spasm randomly, creating unpredictable sounds. Botulinum therapy every 4 months partially stabilizes the situation, but the voice still remains an unreliable tool. I have learned to communicate with gestures and always have text messages ready. You never know if you will be able to say something with your voice. Story 65. Since childhood, my hair has stuck out in all directions, as if I had my fingers in a socket. It was white, unruly, and no hairstyle would hold. I started shaving my head in my teens. My family doctor once jokingly said, an original way of dealing with the dishonest hair syndrome. I laughed and forgot. 20 years later, Google told me that this is a real medical diagnosis. It turned out that my antennae had a scientific explanation. Story 66. It seemed that ski jumping was made for me, but after another jump during the session, my back hurt unbearably. I thought I had pulled a muscle. The pain lasted for weeks, and a strange rash appeared. It turned out to be shingles. At the age of 20, the doctor explained that the stress of the exams could have triggered it. Now I know that not all back pain is caused by sports, and the chickenpox virus can wake up after decades and cause hell. Story 67. I used to think that all people see numbers and colors. A 2 is always green, an 8 is yellow, and a 9 is dark blue. My math teacher wondered why I said green 2 instead of red 5, and I didn't understand the question. It turned out to be synesthesia. Now math is like a rainbow for me, only my classmates envy my colored arithmetic. Story 68. During my period, I was always dizzy, sometimes fainting. I thought it was a side effect of femininity. One day it became critical. I lost my appetite, was very cold, and lost too much blood. She fainted and was taken to the emergency room. The same night she was diagnosed with anemia. It turns out that women's problems don't have to make you faint every month. Story 69. Since my teenage years, I have a strange habit. When I get nervous, I start pulling my hair. At first, I just twisted the strands around my finger, then I started pulling them out hair by hair. The night before an exam, I could pluck out a whole bald spot on the back of my head. My mom scolded me for spoiling my hair, and my friends didn't notice me under my long hair. I thought it was a nervous habit. I had to control myself, but in stressful situations, my hands would reach for my head. Trichotillomania is the name of this disease. The dermatologist noticed characteristic bald spots of different hair lengths. It turns out that this is a type of compulsive action when the brain calms down because of pain. Some people bite their nails, others scratch their skin, and I used to pull out my hair. Now I cut my hair short and carry stress toys in my pocket. It's strange to realize that your bad habit is actually a neurological disorder with a name and treatment. Story 70. My dad constantly complained that his heartbeat was barely audible. He avoided doctors for years because of these complaints. At 52, he needed heart surgery. They found the organ on the right and backwards. That's why he couldn't hear normally. It's strange that the surgeons didn't do an ultrasound before cutting his chest, but apparently there was no time in the ambulance. Story 71. For 30 years, I woke up my neighbors in the morning with my sneezing. It sounds like a cannon shot. I thought that everyone sneezed like that until a colleague offered me a career as a sound engineer in action movies. The ENT diagnosed me with hyperacoustic sneezing due to the special structure of my sinuses. Now I warn people and wear a soundproof mask. My sneeze can scare pigeons a block away. Story 72. Whenever I lie, even innocently, my left leg starts to twitch. My wife calls it a truth detector, and my children can't deceive me in return. The neurologist explained that it is a connection between the speech centers and motor skills. I had to become an honest person by force. A lie is immediately exposed by a twitching leg. Story 73. Since childhood, certain sounds have annoyed me. Scratching my nails on the blackboard, crunching bags, smacking while eating. I didn't just dislike them, but they made me really angry and want to run away. My parents would say, "Don't be whimsical," and my friends would laugh at my pickiness. I had to learn to hide my reaction, but my anger was boiling inside. I thought it was a character trait. I had to be more patient. During the hearing test, the audiologist asked about acute reactions to sounds. It turned out to be misophonia, a neurological disorder when certain sounds cause uncontrollable aggression. The brain interprets normal noises as a threat and triggers the fight-or-flight response. Now I wear earplugs in crowded places and warn my loved ones about my condition. It's a relief to know that this is not a peculiarity, but a real medical condition. Story 74. My friends would go to parties, and I would fall asleep at 8. I thought it was my constitution. I like to sleep. At 19, I started falling asleep while driving at work during conversations. My parents scolded me for being lazy. A somnologist diagnosed narcolepsy. It turns out that the brain does not control sleep-wake cycles. Now I take stimulants and warn people that I can fall asleep in the middle of a sentence. Story 75. Since high school, I was always sleepy. My favorite activity was daytime naps. The situation was getting worse. I could sleep until the break, wake up to eat, and sleep until the end of the lessons. It turned out that I had hypothyroidism due to an autoimmune disease, and my thyroid was almost non-functional. At 25, I had problems again: depression, isolation from friends. It turned out that my vitamin D level had dropped to 10, while the norm was 70. Now I take supplements and adjust my hormones. Story 76. For 5 years in a row, I had terrible abdominal pain lasting 2 weeks. The ultrasound showed nothing. The nurses constantly suspected pregnancy, even though I was a virgin. The doctor diagnosed growth pains and advised me to take ibuprofen. My first visit to the gynecologist, a blood test immediately revealed polycystic ovaries. It turns out that not all teenagers faint from ordinary lower abdominal pain. Story 77. I first put on glasses in the 8th grade and stared at the asphalt on the way home. My mom thought I was upset because of the glasses, but I was just amazed to see that the road had many shades of gray, pebbles, cracks. Before, everything was a blur. The poor child must be upset because of the glasses, and in my head, oh my God, look at all these stones on the road. It turns out that the world is much more detailed than a green blur instead of trees. Story 78. My dreams have turned into directing work in the theater of the absurd. Every night I direct, play the main role, and at the same time am a spectator in the strangest performances. Not the usual dreams that I used to have, but complete stories with elaborate plots, dialogues, and even musical accompaniment. I wake up more tired than when I went to bed, as if I had worked 2 jobs all night. Sometimes my dreams are so vivid and realistic that for hours after waking up I can't figure out what was real and what was a dream. My wife tells me that I talk in my sleep in whole monologues, sometimes in incomprehensible languages, gesticulating, laughing, or crying. The somnologist connected the sensors and found abnormal brain activity during the REM phase. Instead of resting, the neurons worked at maximum speed, creating complex dream scenarios. It turns out that my consciousness does not turn off during sleep, but switches to a hyperactive creative process. This is not rest, but a night shift in the imagination. Deep sleep medications partially help, but sometimes I still wake up with the feeling that I spent the night in the movie studio of my own subconscious. Story 79. For 13 years, I thought that all girls suffered from periods as much as I did. I would lie in the fetal position, screaming in pain, and miss school for weeks. My mom said, "Be patient, everyone goes through this." When I finally got to the gynecologist, I was diagnosed with endometriosis. It turns out that menstruation should not make you faint from pain. Who would have thought? Story 80. For 30 years, I've been living with an internal GPS that constantly goes crazy. I suddenly get lost in familiar places, as if I were on another planet. I can live in a house for years and then leave my room and not know which way the kitchen is. The shopping center, where I have been hundreds of times, turns into a maze with no way out, and a familiar street seems like a completely new location. It's especially terrible in stressful situations. My brain seems to erase all mental maps, leaving me an orphan in my own space. My family got used to the fact that I could get lost even on the way to the store around the corner, and my friends joked about my topographical cretinism, but for me it's a real torment. The navigator in my phone has become my third hand, and I don't even go out into the yard without it. After a series of cognitive tests, a neurologist diagnosed topographic disorientation, a spatial memory disorder resulting from hippocampal dysfunction. The part of the brain responsible for creating mental maps works like a broken GPS. It records routes but cannot read them later. This is not a memory problem in general, but a specific failure in spatial navigation. Techniques for memorizing landmarks help, but sometimes I still find myself in the role of Ivan the Terrible without a guide in my own city. Story 81. My handwriting lives its own chaotic life. In the middle of a normal sentence, my hand can suddenly start writing hieroglyphs instead of letters, or vice versa, switch to a perfect calligraphic style that is not mine. It's not fatigue from long writing, but real metamorphosis of handwriting within a single document. I can start writing in regular letters, and after a paragraph, my hand switches to printed letters, then to italics, and sometimes to incomprehensible curls. It is especially noticeable when signing documents. Each time the signature looks different, making bank employees doubt my identity. Teachers at school scolded me for being untidy. At university, I had to retake written work because it was unreadable. At work, I switched to printing or a voice recorder. Even shopping lists turn into deciphering secret codes. My wife has learned to recognize my various handwritings. After a graphological analysis, a neurologist diagnosed dysgraphia with elements of micro and macrography, a disorder of the brain centers that control the fine motor skills of writing. The neurons responsible for coordinating hand movements while writing work like an orchestra without a conductor. Each one plays its own melody. The size of letters can unpredictably increase or decrease. The slope can change in the middle of a word, and the shape of letters can transform without logical reasons. Occupational therapy and special exercise for fine motor skills have partially stabilized the situation, but my handwriting remains as much a mystery to me as it is to others. Story 82. For 20 years, every night I have been organizing a real funeral for myself. I go to bed and start scrolling through all the horrible scenarios of the future. What if I get cancer? What if I get fired from my job? What if there is an accident with my family? For hours I lie there with my eyes open, my heart pounding, horror movies about my own life playing in my head. My wife got used to my nightly worry sessions and advised me to watch the news less. I considered myself responsible for thinking about possible problems in advance. A psychotherapist diagnosed me with generalized anxiety disorder with nighttime flushing. The brain cannot turn off in the evening and begins to generate catastrophic thoughts to prepare for non-existent threats. Relaxation techniques and medications help, but sometimes I still find myself brainstorming apocalypse instead of restful sleep. Story 83. My ears work like an incorrectly tuned radio. They constantly catch sounds that do not exist. Not tinnitus with a constant ringing, but real audio hallucinations. I hear music, voices, noises, even entire conversations happening somewhere nearby. Most often it's classical music or old songs. Sometimes it's the voices of people I know discussing me in the next room. At first I thought I was really hearing the neighbor's radio or conversations on the street, until I realized that the sounds had no real source. It is especially intense in silence, and when nothing sounds around, my ears start their own concert. I had to always keep some background noise to drown out the internal radio station. ENT doctors checked my hearing, psychiatrists ruled out schizophrenia, neurologists did a brain scan. Technically, everything was normal. It turned out to be musical hallucinations due to impaired auditory processing in the temporal lobes of the brain. Neurons in the auditory area generate electrical signals without external stimuli, creating the illusion of real sounds. This is not a psychiatric disorder, but a neurological feature. The brain turns on memories of sounds when it is bored. Anticonvulsants have partially reduced the intensity of the hallucinations, but they have not yet been able to completely turn off the internal radio. At least now I can listen to quality music even without a player. Story 84. For 18 years, my eyes have been living their own life, blinking whenever they want, not when they need to. Not an ordinary blink, but real eyelid spasms that last for seconds and repeat dozens of times a day. It is especially aggravated by bright light, stress, and fatigue. Then my eyes turn into uncontrollable camera shutter. My colleagues got used to my winks. Some thought it was an attempt to flirt. Others thought it was a nervous breakdown from stress. I had to explain that I wasn't flirting with everyone, but simply had no control over my own eyelids. The ophthalmologist checked my eyesight, the neurologist looked for neurological disorders, the psychiatrist asked about stress, nothing obvious. The spasms intensified in crowded places during important conversations, on dates, the most inappropriate moments for uncontrolled blinking. The ophthalmologist diagnosed benign essential blepharospasm, dystonia of the eyelid muscles. The neurons that control blinking occasionally short-circuit and send chaotic signals. Botulinum toxin partially paralyzes the eyelid muscles every 3 months, reducing spasms. It's strange to realize that even something as simple as blinking can be out of control and require medical intervention. Story 85. I was playing billiards for 16 years when I suddenly had difficulty breathing and felt a pain in my chest. My parents took me home to wait it out and then to the hospital. His lung spontaneously collapsed for no reason. The doctor explained, "It happens to tall people for no reason." Now I know that breathing can stop at any time, and it even has a scientific name, spontaneous pneumothorax. Story 86. Since my teenage years, I have had strange episodes. The doctor diagnosed panic attacks. I did not feel any more anxiety than a normal teenager. At the age of 17, a real epileptic seizure revealed the truth. It was simple partial seizures, temporal lobe epilepsy. For years, they treated non-existent anxiety instead of a real neurological disorder. Story 87. I have always wondered why people complain about the cold in winter. I am always hot, even at 20. I walk in a t-shirt in the snow, open windows when others are wrapped in down jackets. An endocrinologist found the reason: an overactive thyroid, plus a mutation of the climate change gene. Now I am officially considered a heater person. My friends save money on heating by inviting me to visit. Story 88. I was constantly looking for the perfect sleeping position, tossing and turning for hours. I thought it was my peculiarity. My wife complained about my tossing and turning at night. A somnologist diagnosed me with restless leg syndrome. It turns out that the brain sends signals to move the limbs during sleep. Iron and magnesium supplements partially helped, but sometimes I still dance in bed. Story 89. For 25 years, I thought that all people see stars when they move their head suddenly. I got out of bed quickly and saw a fireworks display of light specks in front of my eyes. I leaned over to tie my shoes and straightened up. Another firework. It seemed natural that my blood pressure reacted to the change of position. During the next examination, the ophthalmologist asked about these flashes of light. It turned out to be vitreous detachment, a gel-like mass inside the eye gradually separating from the retina. The process is natural for older people, but it started early for me because of my myopia. The asterisks are pulling on the retina during eye movements. Now I get checked regularly because detachment can lead to blindness. It's strange to find out that your normal is actually an alarm. Story 90. For 30 years, I lived with an internal movie theater, seeing things that weren't there, hearing voices from the sink, having conversations with different consciousnesses in my head. I thought that this is how everyone's brain works, because people always said everyone is different. When I was admitted to a psychiatric hospital because of depression, it turned out that I had disorganized schizophrenia. I was prescribed Risperdal, which killed all my friends in my head every night with one pill. It was terrible. I was losing the only relationships I had. Story 91. ADHD without hyperactivity. Who would have thought? All through school, I struggled with concentration, thinking it was normal. It was only at university that I decided to get checked by a school psychologist. It turns out that you can have an attention deficit without jumping on the walls. For so many years, I thought I was just an inattentive, lazy person. Story 92. When I get nervous, I scratch my hands until they bleed. At interviews, exams, dates, my skin turned into wounds. My mom used to say, "Don't scratch," as if it were so simple. A dermatologist diagnosed stress-related eczema and prescribed ointments. In fact, this neurotic combing is a kind of OCD. Now I cut my nails short and wear gloves at home. Story 93. Having missed another appointment, I sat in the car and tried to remember where I was actually going. The GPS showed the address I had entered 5 minutes ago, but it seemed completely unfamiliar. Such failures became more frequent. I could be driving on a familiar road and suddenly not realize where I was. Sometimes I would stop in the middle of the office corridor, forgetting why I got up from my desk. My colleagues joked about the absent-minded professor, but it scared me. At 45, such things seemed like harbingers of Alzheimer's. The neurologist conducted a detailed examination and found not dementia, but adult attention deficit disorder. It turns out that ADHD does not disappear with age, but is disguised as life problems. The brain periodically turns off attention, creating the effect of memory lapses. Stimulant drugs have restored my clarity of thought. Now at least I remember where I'm going until I get there.